Colleagues and superintendent, we'll just move through every item on the agenda, and if there's something that you'd like to talk about or have questions, or superintendent, I know you have staff here, just let me know, and we'll pause at that item and take all that comment and all those questions. All right, of course, the first item of business is called to order. Second item is approval of the agenda. Third item will be recognitions, and stand by while there we go. Third item, 3.1, recognition of Coach Ernie Martin on his outstanding performance, illustrated by the high student success rate of completing outdoor life course curriculum, presented by Commander Karen Gersak, United States Power Squadron, District 15. Visitors, 4.1, Major Scott A. Bates, USAF retired, Senior Aerospace Science Instructor, Choctawhatchee High School, AFJROTC Unit Mission Brief. We have no items in Section 5. Section 6, we don't yet know. Section 7, Committee and Staff Reports. 7.1, in-county travel paid for the period of September 26 through October 9, 2019, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. 7.2, out-of-county travel paid for the period of September 26 through October 9, 2019, also presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. 7.3, quarterly report, short-term facility use contracts and lease agreements under the $5,000 threshold, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing. 7.4, quarterly report, service agreements under $5,000 threshold for internal and budgetary funds, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing. 7.5, quarterly report, service agreements for law enforcement, presented again by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing. And that brings us to Section 8, consent agenda. 8.1 is approval of the agenda. 8.2, approval of the minutes of the special meeting of October 10, 2019, minutes of the workshop meeting of October 10, 2019, minutes of the regular meeting of October 14, 2019, all recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.3, appropriation of District 2 School Board Member Capital Outlay Funds to Fort Walton Beach High School for 40 iPads for math classrooms in the amount of $11,760, presented by Mr. Dewey Destin and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.4, appropriation of District 5 School Board Member Capital Outlay Funds to Ruckle Middle School for weightlifting equipment in the amount of $10,669.60, presented by Dr. Diane Kelly and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.5, request to re-advertise a public hearing for the adoption of a new School Board Policy 04-19, field trips, presented by Mrs. Sheila Lightbourne, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
Mr. Chairman, this is back before the board. You had authorized advertising of this policy. Since that time, we made a couple of changes in the section dealing with chaperones, and that's the only changes that were there, and so we're just asking to re-advertise, then it'll be back in front of you by December for a public hearing.
All right.
And I do.
Go ahead.
And so the reason why is this because there was already pending field trips ahead that were already approved? Is this?
No, actually, once we brought it to the board in draft form, there were a couple of items that were caught in the draft after that needed to be corrected before it would have gone into policy, and so that's what's been changed, corrected here, so that we're sure that what you voted in December is what we're intending.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. And I would say that when that vote comes before you in December, the recommendation will include that all field trips that have already been approved and scheduled for the year that are in the system will be grandfathered in, and that the policy would take effect in the next semester so that we don't negatively impact trips that schools have already planned.
Right. And I would also just like to end with a comment, just thanking the superintendent and his staff on something, in my opinion, that is very much overdue, is having a consistent field trip policy. And, so thank you to you and your staff, Mr. Chambers.
Thank you. All right. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bryant. All right, so moving forward then to 8.6, request to advertise a public hearing for the adoption of a new school board policy 04-50, medical marijuana use by students who are qualified patients in schools, presented by Ms. Terry Schroeder, Program Director, Student Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
And Dr. White, as you can imagine, this is something that is different for districts all across the state of Florida. And as you know, this is state statute required. And if you would, I would like to say that Mr. McGinnis and Ms. Schroeder has put a lot of time and energy into this policy and making sure that we're in compliance. But I'd like for Mr. McGinnis to share just a little bit about this policy.
Mr. Chairman and board members, as the superintendent said, the policy that's being brought forward to you is required by Florida law. The state legislature required that school districts adopt policies to provide procedures for qualified students who are patients who have all the proper certifications and prescriptions for medical marijuana to be able to access that at school under terms and conditions that would be in your policy. This policy has been crafted and put together consistent with similar policies that are being adopted by other school districts across the state. We have been careful in this policy to walk the fine line between the continuing issues at the federal level where marijuana is still a controlled substance, and yet at the same time trying to comply with Florida law requiring that you have a policy to accommodate the medical marijuana. Some of the important factors to consider in this policy, as you have seen it, this policy does not allow for any district employee or contracted health clinic staff to administer the medical marijuana to a student. It does not allow for our clinics or schools to store any medical marijuana product on our campuses. The administration of the medical marijuana would have to be by a certified registered caregiver, and that's all part of the state's registration system they've set up under law. It could happen on campus in a designated area that school principals can provide for. The administration will be by this caregiver, who typically I think probably will be a parent, but they will have to provide to us their proper registration credentials and show us that they are in the state system as a caregiver. The student's physician will have to sign off on a application request for this to happen at the school, and the caregiver will be responsible for bringing the medical marijuana to the school, administering it, and taking back with them any portions of that medication that are not administered. The policy encourages families to administer medical marijuana at home when that can be done and when it doesn't, risk the safety or health of the student. So the policy it clearly states that the preference is that this administration happen at home, not at school. The policy does not allow students to carry medical marijuana products with them at school, and makes clear that that will still be considered a violation of our zero tolerance policies for drugs on campus. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any other questions. We provide definitions in the policy that are consistent with the statutes and regulations, and have got it in front of you for consideration to allow us to advertise it for a public hearing.
Well, just one, and I think this has been the law for some time. But if I'm not mistaken, there was a compulsion to school districts to do something. And would you speak to that?
Yes, sir. The statute has been in place. A great majority of districts have not had these policies in place out of concerns over the conflict with the federal law, because of course public school districts are the recipients of all kinds of federal funding. The Department of Education has, though, in the last month issued a mandate to school superintendents that these policies will be adopted by December 31st of this year. And so in order to ensure that compliance, we're bringing this forward to you in that timely manner. I also would let you know that you will see in our policy a provision which makes it clear that if at any point there is any issue with any federal funding in the district because of this policy, that the policy automatically becomes null and void, so that we don't have an issue with
Okay.
the federal government.
Good. Federal funds.
Yes, sir.
Well, that sort of explains why we and others are doing something now, if we've gotten another mandate from the Department of Education.
Yes, sir.
All right, I get it. Any questions or comments?
Do we anticipate having just a handful of students that this would apply to, or a good number, or
Good question.
any idea?
Ms. Schroeder may have a better idea of numbers. I can tell you that
Or have we
from the
had
situation that
inquiry?
I've been involved in, there have been a minimal number of requests
That's what I
so
would
far.
imagine, but-
I don't know, once the policy's in place, if that will change, but we have not, I mean, we've not had a large number of families asking for this
Okay.
accommodation.
Over the past several years, we've had maybe 2 or 3 annually. We really haven't had the policy in place at that time, so we were taking those individually as they came. I do know of one specifically right now that will be directly affected by this policy, as the manner of the student receiving the medication does not fit into our policy. So that will have an impact on one specific student I know of at this time. But there's not that many out there at this point.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Schroeder.
And I just want to thank Mr. McGinnis again, Ms. Schroeder, for pulling this together.
I have a question, but this isn't about students, but what about employees?
This policy specifically says that it is not expanded to employees because we still have mandatory drug-free workplace policy and regulations in place, and that would be a violation of that, so this does not address employees.
Okay, so we don't, okay. All right, just curious, because that could come up.
I'm sure it will.
All right, anything else, colleagues?
Thank you.
Superintendent, ready to move forward?
Yes, sir.
All right. Then. Okay, let's move on to 8.7. Request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of revised School Board Policy 06-33, administrative leave, suspension, and dismissal of employees, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Chairman, if
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hale, if you would just tell us what minimum, I saw the red line version, but can you give us the Reader's Digest condensed version of what we're changing?
Yes, sir. Good morning,
morning.
Board Superintendent. Happy to do it. Working with the Board Attorney and the Human Resources Department, there was a little bit of a hole in how to handle security beyond employment in the case of a termination or a separation, and so we just wanted to have a methodology and a policy on how to handle personal belongings, put some deadlines, some timelines, and some procedures in place for what we're going to do with office space and particular board property and things like that, so that there was a kind of shore up the security and to know exactly what we're going to do with those types of things.
Thanks.
The only comment I would add is that we've been so careful and so cautious about using the term superintendent and board, and in one place or two, I think I recall there that it said, for instance, return property to the district. Should that say to immediate supervisor, or to me, the district seemed a little bit nebulous, but just something to consider maybe.
Okay. You'll look at that.
I will look at that. Thank you.
Thank
That's a good
you.
point. Thank you. All right, thank you, Dr. Hill. All right, 8.8, organizational restructure, computer and handheld technician, MIS-IT, presented by Mr. Eric Mitchell, Director, MIS and Instructional Technology, and approved, recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Any questions or comments?
I think this is great that we're getting another courier position. I know that's been a tough situation for a long time, so Mr. Mitchell, thank you for working that out and getting that all straight, because I think that's going to benefit everybody in the long run, so that's a great thing.
I can't take full credit without Rita and Steve as well.
Certainly, Mr. Horton and Ms. Scallon, thank you. That's, like I said, that's going to benefit most everybody in the district with that courier service now having 3 routes or 3 courier drivers.
And if I understood correctly, we are adding a courier position, but it's not really adding a position in the
right.
sense that I think, Mr. Mitchell, you basically are giving up a position. Is that correct?
We are reducing a
Bootstrap.
position to create a new one that costs a lot less.
Exactly. So
It's
so
really-
that's
yeah. That's great.
Thanks.
Well, technology shifted to the point it allowed us to do that.
All right, very good. All right, thank you, sir. All right, so 8.9, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of a new job description, IT Field Technician MIS, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Okay, I think we already kind of talked about that. All right, 8.10, Budget Amendment Number 1, Fiscal Year 2019-2020, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.11, Monthly Financial Statement for September 2019, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.12, Invoices to be approved for payment, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.13, School Donations, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
And as always, we're very grateful to the members of the public for making donations to our schools. And I think on this list, 3 of those happen to be for the Central Zone schools, so very appreciative.
All right, thank you. 8.14, Payroll Warrant Register and Accounts Payable Warrant Register for September 2019 totaling $24,268,678.04, and bank transfers for September 2019 totaling $6,465,000, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.15, ITB 20-02, Site Improvements, Time and Material District-Wide, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Chairman, if I
Yes,
may,
sir.
maybe Vince can straighten it out. I was a little confused. We're awarding this to both applicants?
Could you come forward, Mr. Wyndham? Superintendent?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wyndham.
Sure. Yeah, that is correct. They, if you look at the pricing that was submitted, in the opinion of the Facilities Committee that looked at this bid, it's to our advantage to go ahead and award to both, because the smaller projects may play out one way, larger projects may play out another way. So they can basically get quotes on some of these projects among these two and see which way, you may be better off with one in one case and the other in another case.
So that's the way it'll work. We'll get quotes from both of them and see
We
which
can,
is
and
best.
like I said, if you look at the pricing, I think there were a couple columns there. If it ends up, the job would involve, like on Form A 2 and 3, quite a bit of difference in the
Yeah.
hourly rate.
I saw that.
But then if you go down to the material costs, quite a bit of difference the other way.
Yeah.
So it kind of could play out both ways according to what type of project we're doing.
This may be a new and innovative way of doing this, huh? We can get 2 or 3 guys that we see which one is the best. That might be a good plan.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you. All right, moving on to 8.16, tag on bid purchase over $25,000, International Restaurant Distributors Incorporated, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.17, tag on bid purchase over $25,000, WTI, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.18, exempted purchase over $25,000, Max Scholar, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.19, agreement between the Florida Department of Education and the Okaloosa County School District on the district's data access of the Florida School Safety Portal, submitted by Mr. Danny Dean, Specialist, Safe Schools, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.20, Florida Safe Schools Assessment Tool, District Best Practices, presented by Mr. Danny Dean, Specialist, Safe Schools, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
And Dr. White,
Yes, sir.
so first of all, these kind of last two kind of go together, and I do want to say, a lot of time and effort has gone into preparing these documents, and our school principals and assistant principals working with their staff have prepared this report. And of course, under the leadership of Mr. Danny Dean, he's done an absolutely fantastic job to make sure that we've hit every timeline. And if you don't mind, I'd like Mr. Dean to come up and just give a brief summary.
Welcome, Mr. Dean.
Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the board, it's my pleasure on behalf of the superintendent to come to you this morning and discuss the Florida Safe Schools Assessment. As you're aware, this began last year, post Senate Bill 7026, where every district in the state of Florida is required to conduct not only a individual school assessment of all public schools, but then a district-wide assessment of best practices. This year, as the superintendent has told you, we met our deadline of October 1st. All schools had submitted their individual school assessments, and those were reviewed by the District Office of Safe Schools for consistency and any discrepancies or any items that we need to improve upon. And then the district assessment was recently completed. I'd like to point out that the information in the assessment, both the individual school assessments and the district-wide assessment, are confidential for official use only and not subject to public disclosure. So we'll highlight the strategies to be taken and recommendations by the Office of Safe Schools to the board in a closed session. But there are some items that in a public forum I would like to read. First, beginning with the objective of the Okaloosa County Assessment, district-wide assessment. The objective of the Okaloosa County's safety and security best practices are to maintain a welcoming and supportive schools with a positive climate for students, faculty, and staff while keeping schools safe, secure, and prepared for managing crises. This is accomplished through the fervent attention given to each of the 4 phases of emergency management: mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. With the increasing evolving threats to school safety, the Okaloosa County School District will continue to incorporate holistic and innovative approaches to school safety through community and public safety partnerships and integrating community-based services with those services already provided by the school district. With the goal of preventing violence through resolution of conflict and problems that underlie threatening behavior. Additionally, the district will continue to support and collaborate with a robust and accomplished division of safe school officers that was also twice awarded the Florida SRO Unit of the Year. This will be accomplished through memorandums of understanding with the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office. The Okaloosa County School District has made great strides in the enhancement of school safety and security measures through innovative thinking, programs, community and public safety collaboration, and the conscientious and meticulous use of existing capital funds in conjunction with the target priority use of physical hardening security grant allocations. I'm pleased to announce that the Okaloosa County School District has met or exceeded all school safety and security related legislative requirements in accordance with Senate Bill 7026, Senate Bill 7030, and the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act. A broad summary of the results of the district best practices assessment for 2019-2020 school year profoundly denotes evidence of the district's commitment to school safety as well as community and organization-wide cooperation with this priority. The district has met or exceeded all legislative safe school requirements, a perceptible emphasis on emergency planning and the establishment of model emergency management and emergency preparedness procedures, as well as conspicuous support programs and prevention initiatives were apparent throughout my assessment. The assessment covers a broad range of categories, from violence prevention and intervention to our community collaboration throughout the district, all the way to training and emergency management procedures. And again, we'll discuss the recommended strategies and our plans moving forward in a closed session and allow for input from the board. It's also my duty as your Safe Schools specialist to recommend on behalf of the board any statewide legislative considerations to the Department of Education, the governor, and the state legislature. So during that session, any recommendations that you have or would like to have brought before the Department of Education or the Office of Safe Schools at the state level will be documented in this assessment as well prior to your approval, it being forwarded to Tallahassee, and that will be accomplished with a deadline of November 1st. So if anyone has any questions.
Well, I think I have a couple. So how about colleagues? Y'all have any questions or thoughts or issues?
I would just compliment Mr. Dean for all his hard work and effort, and, you know, my travels last week to a FISBIC conference, I had the opportunity to talk to different school board members, and, you know, Okaloosa County is one of those that come up in discussion about safety and how we are the leaders in school safety and following through on what Tallahassee is asking us to do. So I would just commend Mr. Dean on the hard work that he does, and all the other people that are making this happen for our school district. So,
Thank you. And again, we wouldn't be where we are today. And again, just to expand upon your statement that we are known throughout the state as being a leader in school safety. We were recently visited by the director of the State Office of Safe Schools that had wonderful things to say about Okaloosa County and our initiatives here with a priority focus on school safety. And that couldn't be accomplished without the leadership of the board, our superintendent, senior staff, our principals, and just the magnetism of excellence that's prominent throughout our entire school community. So again, thank you for the opportunity to present this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. And the thing that I guess that and I think we can talk about this, these assessments, I mean, these school assessments, they really weren't something that you could sit down and do in 15 minutes, were they?
No, sir. No, sir.
Well, maybe could you, I mean, these were quite lengthy and involved.
Yes, sir. There's multiple categories. The district assessment in and of itself is nearly 40 pages of questions that have to be answered, and not just a yes/no type thing, but an explanation as to why we did something a certain way. And then the individual school assessment is is much more in detail even than the district-wide, because it also gets into not only the safe school practices, but also the facility itself. So there's a huge collaboration of all of the departments within the district to be able to accomplish this in such a short time frame. And then I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but this year they actually made some changes to the document itself, to the tool from last year, and there was a delay in getting that out where it's typically out to us by the 1st of May. There was a delay in that at the state level, and so when we got that, we had about a month to get that accomplished for all district and charter schools in Okaloosa County, and we met that deadline.
Well, that was the question I was going to ask, because I know our charter school friends from Destin are here. And so when they passed this legislation, I just heard you say that this was for all public schools, and it did include charter schools. Is that correct?
Correct. All of the legislative requirements, whether it be the safe school assessment or particular training, any of the requirements that are in statute are requirements of all public schools, both district schools and our charter schools. Correct.
Okay. And I guess the theory behind that is because we're the approving agency, and charter schools are public schools, so they too have to complete this process.
Yes.
And then they submit that to your office. Is that correct? The charter schools as well?
We have oversight over ensuring that the completion is done.
Okay.
I have access to go in
Okay.
and review the charter schools assessments.
Okay.
The actual submission itself, the way that tool works is it goes directly to Tallahassee
All right.
upon submission.
I see. Okay.
But I do have oversight as far as being able to go in there to make sure that
Yes.
deadlines are met. And then we also meet on a regular basis, but at a minimum annually, or at least provide the opportunity for our charter schools to sit with me
Sure,
or
questions or-
walk through as far as
Very
any
good.
legislative updates and things like that,
Good.
to make sure that they're receiving all of the same information and afforded the same opportunities that we are as a
All right.
district.
All right. Very good. All right. Any questions or comments?
Just
Go
one more
ahead.
comment, Mr. Dean. So the assessment, I remember last year I sat in your office and went through it on your computer, before you were sending it in. So that is available for us to, as school board members.
Yes,
to
sir.
come in
Again,
next.
as last year, I have brought a sealed copy for the board that will be left, that each of you could individually read through the entire document and look at each individual question, in addition to the executive summary that I'll give you later this morning.
And I totally agree. It's not just something you just put together in 15 minutes. I know last year it was very well put together and a lot of detail in there too, so.
I just hope the public is noting that, like you said, we are the forerunners, but what's important is our district and the parents and the citizens here feel good about what we're doing. They're starting to see some physical evidence of the things that we're doing to keep our students and our employees safe, and I hope that makes them feel confident in the steps we've taken and that we will continue to take as we move forward with this. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dean. Superintendent, does that conclude that
Yes, sir.
portion for you? All right, then. So we'll go ahead now and move to item 8.21. Application to the state of Florida for an educational facility security grant, Senate Bill 2500, presented by Dr. Bill Smith, Program Director of Facilities Planning, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.22, sale and disposal of surplus property, presented by Mr. Steve Bolton, Program Director Maintenance, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.23, donation of surplus school buses donated from Escambia County School District to Okaloosa County School District, presented by Mr. Jay McInnes, Program Director Transportation, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Mr. Chambers.
And Dr. White, as Mr. McGinnis makes his way up to the podium, I do want to thank Escambia County, the superintendent, and the school board for once again donating some of the buses that they're recycling out of their fleet, which helps us update our fleet.
That's terrible.
So I was just trying to say that in a good way.
Yeah.
But,
I'll say it for you.
but if Mr. McGinnis, if you would go ahead and
We
explain
update
that.
our fleet with their old buses.
We are, and as the superintendent said, that's pretty much what we're doing. We're replacing some of our old buses with some of their older buses.
Right.
So we are thankful, though, that they are able to work with us again on this
Absolutely.
year. And it's a shot in the arm for our fleet and our maintenance guys that are doing a good job of keeping them running every day. So we appreciate that, and I appreciate the superintendent and Ms. Scallon and Mr. Horton working with me and allowing me to pursue this again with Escambia County. So it's something that we desperately need.
Well, appreciate your work on this and helping that to happen, and also certainly we appreciate Escambia County for helping us out in our situation. Any comments? Mr.
This
White?
is the second year that they've assisted us in this way. The
Yes, ma'am.
second round of buses from
Yes,
them.
ma'am.
So as an update for the people watching and out there, once we have these, what will the oldest bus that we have in operation be?
Our goal is to have the oldest route bus be a 2001 model, which will.
Well, we're
allow
moving
us-
into this
We're-
century.
we
so-
are. We're-
Where we
we're-
had some
we're
others
making
before.
strides. We're
So,
making
okay.
that will be, every bus will have seatbelts on it, and that'll be our oldest route bus.
They don't all have air conditioning yet. We're not quite there, right?
They do not.
Okay.
Some of these that we're getting do have air conditioning. I believe 3 of them do. And then we're getting 5 special needs buses. Those have air conditioning, but 3 of the regular buses also have it. For what reason, I don't know, but they do. So we're glad to get those as well.
And while we appreciate Escambia County, we're hoping one day we don't have to take the hand-me-downs, that we can purchase new ones in our own fleet. But we do appreciate that because it is better than what we had.
That's right. Anything?
And Mr. McGinnis answered all my questions, so we're good. So,
Our goal is to get them over here where it's a little more challenging because last summer we got them. It was easier to do in the summer. So we're devising a plan now how to go and get them. We may have to do it in 2 or 3 days during the difference with the routes.
Right.
But to get them over here and get them cleaned up and get the cameras and radios on them and get them going as soon as possible, that may be sometime in December or right after the holidays. We're just going to have to wait and see how that goes, but that's kind of our timeline right now.
And I do want to say while Mr. McGinnis is up here, so before coming into this role, I didn't necessarily work hand in hand with transportation. And I will say, Mr. McGinnis and his staff, they are absolutely fantastic. As you can imagine, they don't necessarily get a bunch of emails saying how great they do. but they do sometimes get some with concerns. But the manner that Mr. McGinnis and his staff always reach out to those parents quickly and efficiently, and the way that they will accommodate where they can, he does an absolutely fantastic job. And I will, well, I'll leave that, the comment that I was going to say for later, but just very much appreciate the work that you and your staff do. So thank you.
Well,
Appreciate it.
and Superintendent, Mr. McInnes has been around almost as long as I've been around, and I'm sure, yeah, a long time. And I'm sure he remembers what Mr. Bruner used to say about the 3 Bs. And for Mr. McInnes, buses, one of those 3 Bs, band, ball, and buses, Mr. McInnes understands how important that B is, and we appreciate it.
Absolutely.
A lot, Jay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. All right, so we'll move on now to 8.24, PACT License Agreement between the School Board of Okaloosa County and the Home Builders Institute to provide services to students in the CTE programs in Okaloosa County for the 2019-2020 school year, presented by Ms. April Branscombe, CTE Specialist, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. All right. 8.25, Military Connected Schools Initiative to 2019-2020 Grant Application, presented by Ms. Tammy Ellis, Specialist, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.26, 2019-2020 SAC membership for Okaloosa County Schools, presented by Ms. Ann Flanagan, Specialist, Staff Development and Reading, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.27, course adoptions for the 2019-2020 school year, presented by Ms. Denise Berry, Specialist, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
I have a question
sir.
about this particular item, and I just want to make sure, is this the, basically the part of legislation that was talking about personal financing that was going to be required for students to take?
So we have Ms. Berry coming forward.
Welcome, Ms. Berry.
Yes, it is part of statute. It was previously economics with financial literacy, then with the statute, it then separated it into economics, and then this is actually an elective that'll be offered second semester.
Okay, so this will basically, I know a lot of us parents, you know, we do our best to teach
Right.
children about money and all that.
Yes.
They don't always listen to us, but when it's in the school environment, hopefully this will be a tool
Yes,
to
that'll
help
be an
them.
elective being offered second semester.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
All right, thank you.
How much money did the state send us to implement this? It's some-
It's an IOU.
somewhat
They gave
ir-
us the
yeah.
adoption of financial literacy.
Somewhat ironic that they
One should say yes.
tell us to spend money that we don't have
yes.
under the guise of financial responsibility. I love it.
Good point, Mr. Destin. You got it.
All right. Okay, 8.28, course adoption for Crestview High School for 2019-2020 school year, presented by Ms. Denise Berry, Specialist, Curriculum Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
And since this does affect a school that I represent, Crestview High School, I just would like to thank Ms. Berry for helping get this program. The nursing program at Crestview High School has taken off. And just this week alone, I've seen 2 Facebook posts talking about the nursing program at Crestview High School, and we are very fortunate to have Dr. McKenzie, who's leading that program up over there. Not very many school districts have a nurse with her credentials that are out there teaching, because we know she could be out there making a lot more money doing what she is trained to do. So we are very appreciative of that, and the students up at Crestview High School are definitely benefiting from that. So,
All right, thank you, Mr. Bryant. All right, so moving on now to Section 9, Superintendent's Human Resources Recommendations. 9.1, Employees on Administrative Leave, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources. 9.2, Deferred Retirement Option Program Drop, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources. 9.3, Cleared Certification Requirements and Issuance of Contracts for the 2019-2020 school year, presented by Ms. Karen Peak, Program Director, Professional Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.4, Out-of-Field Report for the 2019-2020 school year, presented by Ms. Karen Peak, Program Director, Professional Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.5, employment separations presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.6, personnel recommendations presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.7, employee transfers presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.8, reinstatement reimbursement of sick leave due to line-of-duty illness, injury, medical examination, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And then 9.9, leave without pay, presented by Dr. Lee Hale, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. That takes us to discussion agenda, section 10, 10.1, charter school contract between the School Board of Okaloosa County, Florida, and Destin High School Incorporated, presented by Ms. Ann Flanagan, Specialist, Staff Development and Reading, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Superintendent, since this bears your recommendation, I'll turn this over to you, sir.
Yes, sir. And as Ms. Flanagan comes forward, I do want to say, as you know, this has been a process, and it's been a process that's been very collaborative. And I do want to thank Ms. Flanagan, Mr. McGinnis, for the work that they've done, and I want to thank the Destin Charter High School for the work that they've done as well. I appreciate all that you all have done in terms of the communication going back and forth. And once again, I just very much appreciate it, so thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Flanagan.
Morning. Morning, members of the school board, Superintendent, Mr. McGinnis. I'd like to begin by providing you some background on the process that led us to the Destin High School charter contract that the superintendent is recommending for approval. On February 13th, the district convened an application review team consisting of members of our departments, members such as Finance, ESE, Transportation, Human Resources, and so on, to review the application using the Florida Charter School Application Instrument. On April 2nd, an interview with the Destin Charter School Committee was conducted to give the review committee an opportunity to ask clarifying questions. Each section of the application was found to meet the standard, and that led to the recommendation for approval by the school board on April 22nd, 2019. And that brings us to the contract today. The contract before you is the result of negotiation conducted between Mr. McGinnis for Okaloosa School District and Destin Charter School Incorporated. It is aligned with Florida Standard School Contract, the Florida statutory requirements, and Okaloosa School Board policy. I have been asked to provide an overview for you. The term of the contract is for 5 years, commencing on the first day of July 2020 and ending on the 30th day of June 2025. The school has the right to postpone the opening for up to 2 years. However, that delay will be included in the length of the contract. For the initial year of opening, Destin High School will match our school calendar. A complete list of documents to be provided to the district prior to opening is included in section Roman numeral 2. The contract itself is subject to renewal or termination by the district. Specific terms for non-renewal are outlined in the contract on pages 4 through 8. In the event of termination or non-renewal, all assets purchased by public school funds revert to the district. The school's plan for educational and related program is included in the application in Appendix 1 and becomes part of the contract. The district will perform an annual review to evaluate performance and progress towards schools' academic achievement goals based on performance data. All students will participate in state assessments. Students are eligible to participate in all interscholastic and extracurricular activities at the public school to which they are zoned in accordance with Florida law. The school will adopt the district's ELL plan, the PPP for promotion and graduation requirements, and the district code of conduct, suspension, and expulsion. Exceptional students will be provided with programs implemented in accordance with federal, state, and local policies. The school must comply with all statutory requirements specifically related to charter schools and may not discriminate in educational programs, activities, or employment. And as previously stated, it must also comply with all school safety and security requirements of federal and state law. Financial accountability for the school is included in Section 4. A charter school is a public school, and students are funded in the same manner as students enrolled in other public schools. Charter schools are not permitted to charge tuition or fees except those that are normally charged by other public schools in the district. Financial reports are to be submitted monthly, and an annual audit will be conducted. The school board is not responsible for any purchases made by the school, any debts or loans incurred. Section 5 identifies the facilities. The school has initially identified that it will be located at 200 Beach Drive, Destin. Facilities must comply with all statutes. Enrollment shall not exceed the number of students identified in the charter, the zoning capacity, or certificates of occupancy. If applications for enrollment exceed the number of the capacity for the program, students will be selected through a random process. In year 1, the anticipated enrollment for grades 9 through 10 is 275. In year 2, the anticipated enrollment for grades 9 through 11 is 475. In year 3, the anticipated enrollment for grades 9 through 12 is 675. In year 4, the anticipated enrollment is 775, and in year 5, 800. Section 6 identifies transportation. Transportation will be provided within the city limits and the unincorporated area of Destin. Transportation will be the sole responsibility of the school and must be provided according to district, state, and federal requirements. Food services will also be the responsibility of the school and consistent with Florida statutes. Insurance and indemnification requirements are included in the contract in Section 8. Articles of incorporation and bylaws are included as an appendix and identify the school as not-for-profit. All meetings and communications of the governing board are subject to the Florida Sunshine Laws. The governing board is the sole responsible agent for setting policy, guiding finance, and operation of the school. The school has indicated that initially it will be a private employer and will not participate in the Florida retirement system. The school shall be responsible for the hiring of its own personnel and must retain qualified staff. I would like to acknowledge Ms. Christy No, consultant, Dr. Preble Ramswell, President of the Board of the Director, and members of the Governing Board who are here with us today, and we are happy to entertain any questions for you.
Thank you, Ms. Flanagan. Any questions at this point, colleagues, comments?
Just have a comment.
Sure.
It's very well written and very thorough, and I know there was a lot of legwork behind the scenes with the two legal parties working together. Thank you for that, and I'm excited for the Destin community as I've lived and worked there for many years, so I know that those students are excited.
All right, Ms. Flanagan, let me see if the superintendent or the attorney has any commentary at this juncture.
So my only comment right now would be, would y'all like to make a comment?
Welcome.
Thank you. Christy Noe, welcome. Thank you for having us here today, Chairman, members of the board, Superintendent, Mr. McGinnis. I do want to just thank you all for the collaboration that we've had throughout this process. It has really been a collaboration. We started this process in July, I believe, with the contract. And I don't think Okaloosa County has had a new charter school in quite a long time. And lots has changed since charter schools when you guys had a new one. I've been a part of the charter school movement since 1997, and so we've seen a lot of change throughout the statutes over time. And I think the process that we've worked with, Ms. Flanagan and Mr. McGinnis has extremely been helpful because the state has sort of a prescribed contract, but then there's lots of nuances that each district has. And so I think it was really a great process to go through with Mr. McGinnis and the staff here with the district. And I know it was, for us, it was really helpful. I work with lots of large districts, and sometimes it takes a long time to get answers. But Mr. McGinnis and his staff and the superintendent and the staff here were very quick to go and get answers when we had requests for things in the contract. And so I know that the board here is extremely grateful for the process and sort of how quickly we were able to get through this contract. And I feel like both sides, I think the point is that we want to, as the school, be transparent in all of the things that we do and to be successful, because these are, in fact, your students. These are Okaloosa County students. We're a public school. We want to be accountable, and so we want to work together throughout this process. And I think the whole vision for the board here, that they're here today, was to be able to have a school in Destin and to be able to serve those students in an area that sometimes is difficult to get across the bridge to. And so they're excited to be at this point where we are today, and we look forward to working with you in the future. So, Mr. McGinnis, I also want to just personally thank you for your flexibility with some of my crazy times that I had to say, can we call a little bit later? But thank you so much for all of your efforts with me.
And thank you for all of your assistance.
All right, thank you.
And we appreciate comments, and I think the contract's attached. I don't know how often it will be downloaded because it was short, wasn't it?
Oh, it was really short, right?
It was 450 pages?
Yes, sir.
Right, quite lengthy. Any other questions or comments? Ms. Vanchek?
Yeah, a timeline. Do we have that?
Yes.
Okay, because you got to get the students before you can see how many teachers and all that, so I was just wanted to see that.
Right. Yes, there's a timeline in there. And so actually the charter application is also an attachment to the contract.
Right.
And so we've got sort of the timeline for that. And the first, we're going to do student recruitment, and then the principal recruitment, and then the principal will recruit the teachers.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just so I'm clear, we have 2 years to get open, is that correct?
So the statute requires that you can actually defer for 2 years without it impacting the term of the charter. But the plan is they're trying to open in August.
I understand.
So-
I'm just trying to figure what happens if it doesn't quite work out. Then we'd have to redo the charter, is that the way that works?
No, sir. So we can actually defer, and I think we made reference to that in our charter in the contract.
The contract allows them to defer for up to 2 planning years, and the charter would still be in effect, waiting to see if they're going to open. It does say that in the event they do not open by the end of the second planning year, the charter would be terminated.
Okay.
But you would not have to redo the charter if they chose to take an extra planning year.
Gotcha. Thanks.
I just have one question too, and moving forward, I know there was some talk, Ms. Flanagan talked about that y'all might have capacity issues, and if that's the case, you would go to a lottery basically to select students. Who would oversee that particular lottery? So we can be transparent with the.
Absolutely. So we work with a lot of schools throughout the state of Florida, and one of our pieces is we want to be extremely transparent and fair and accept all students. So the statute requires that if we set the grade level, say for 9th graders, we're going to accept 125 students, and the number of applications exceeds 125. So then all of those applications, say we had 150 applications, would go into a lottery. And what we typically do is put out an RFP for a computer-based lottery system. One of the ones that we use a lot is called Lotteries. And so parents actually go in and they enter their information, and it's all very basic. It's a student name, address, grade, date of birth, nothing else about their academic performance. And so it all literally is on a date certain. The lottery is conducted, and it's very transparent. In fact, some parents get irritated because they get constant email updates about your child has moved this number on the waiting list, or this was accepted, and so it's and you can even look and see, when things are moved. So that is the approach that we take, and it would be all online, and so there's nobody actually touching or manipulating it. It's done by a third party, and it would be a system like that.
And the reason why I say that is because as general public schools, we are all children are guaranteed a public education in the state of Florida.
Right.
And we know that. So, and that's why I would, if it does get to a capacity level, how would we ensure that a child that's EBD or ESE or, is going to not be discriminated against?
Absolutely. And I will tell you, for our firm, we work a lot with ESE, and that's our passion. And that is absolutely something that we want to guarantee. So, agreed.
So, good luck.
Yes.
Just so I understand, I see how that works for the first year if you go over capacity, but year 2, you're over capacity. Does everybody go back into the lottery, even the folks that are there already for first year?
No, sir.
Okay.
So the way that it works, and so there's very specific in the statute as far as the enrollment. So you can give preference to certain students. The statute allows for certain preferences. You have sibling preferences, board members, employee preferences. So those students get in first. If you're already enrolled in the school, you keep your seat. So you don't have to go through the lottery every time. And so what happens is, each year the board sets what their number of seats are for each grade level. So for example, those kids that are in 10th grade this year would roll up into 11th grade. And if the building, they added, say, 2 more classes, they would add 50 more seats. They have 50 seats available. If they get 75 applications, those 50 or those 75 applications would all go into the lottery. But those kids that were in 10th grade rolling into 11th grade would remain. If we had any of those 75 applications that were board member children, employees' children, any of those preferences, they would not have to go into the lottery. So that's how it's determined each year. And it's very prescribed in the statute. And it's very transparent, and it's also, it has to be put on the school's website. It has to be put on where the lottery is, where the parents go to register the students, so that everybody knows the equal opportunity for the seats.
Okay. That clarifies it for me. Thanks.
You're welcome.
And I do have one more question in regards to open enrollment. So students that, I know we have a handful of students in Destin that go to Niceville High School, and if those students decide to go to Destin High School, would they qualify to go back to Niceville High School if they chose to go back, or would they have to go to Fort Walton Beach High School after that point? Okay. I always look at the attorney.
By our controlled open enrollment policy, once a student's in a school and they maintain enrollment there, then they're eligible to stay through the highest grade level offered. But in that situation that you've suggested, if they elect to go back to a different school, then, and they live in, say, the Destin area, which is zoned to Fort Walton, they would not be entitled to go immediately back to Niceville High School. They would be able to apply through a hardship or any other process, or if there were seats available, they'd be able to apply for them just like any other first-time enrollee.
Right.
And to be clear, that's for every school.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Not just Niceville.
Exactly right.
Right. And like I said, I knew there was a handful of students from Destin that go to Niceville High School. So not just everybody goes to Fort Walton Beach High School. So.
And some go to Choctaw as well.
Right.
So we do like to let students attend where we have room and they have the ability to do so.
But I believe Fort Walton and Choctaw were still open, but I know Niceville was not. So.
That was correct at the beginning of the school year. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Well, I just have one. So assuming that this is approved on Monday evening, what does that mean?
Well, it will mean that the charter will be signed with the authority of the board by you as the chairman, and it will then be in effect, and they will move out then with their timeline for their planning, their recruitment, their facility preparation, and then it'll be up to them to notify the district if they are still planning to open for the fall of 2020, or whether they're going to take a planning year. But in effect, it shifts the work over to the charter school and lets them begin.
Okay.
And one of the things, so I'll tell you, this morning I had an email with one of the governance training groups out of Tallahassee. And so the governing board is queued up because as soon as the charter contract is signed, they are now in effect in part of the sunshine. And so I've told them, no more conversations about anything related to the school that may become before the board for a vote. So they're all in the sunshine. And so that they're going to go through the required governance training. And so really all the work now comes back to us. And so the timeline begins as soon as that charter contract gets signed. And so the sprint now starts back on our side to see, if we're going to open and have the facility and everything in place.
I do have one more question. I know it was put out about the mascot decision and the colors. Has that been made? Has that decision been made? Has it been made public? I know you were voting on that.
That's one of our board members, again, Myra.
Good morning,
Good morning.
welcome.
I'm Myra Williams, and I'm one of the governing board members. So yes, the decision has been made. We haven't officially
Announced,
unveiled
okay.
it or recognized the submittals. We have 4. We had a tie for the mascot. However, then we brought it to the real world and tried the graphic, just kind of make it one, and what are we going to do? And we're kind of, we are not ready to unveil that. We want it to be right. So that process within our governing board is still transpiring. So in order not to keep the winners waiting, we're going to go ahead and recognize them in the media real soon. And then we don't know.
Okay.
From that point, we may take it back to the student body, or we may just let the first class, make the decision on the mascot. But we're still working on it, and we will have something public to say about. We were going to reveal the new logo at the same time that we gave the money out.
Okay.
But it's not going to work that way. So we'll go
Not
ahead and
always
just
easy.
recognize the winners for this
Thank you.
time. So that's it.
All right, thank you.
One other thing I wanted to let you all know is we are in the process of a federal CSP grant. So we went through, it's the federal startup money for charter schools, and we went through the capacity interview, which is the stage 1, and we're waiting for the Florida Department of Education to notify us about the stage 2, which is where we would be starting the budget process, and it's about a $625,000 grant to be used for textbooks, technology, that type of thing. And that's where we would be coming back to you, and it would have to go through your finance for approval as far as to make sure that we've got it all right and needs superintendent signature. And that's a relatively short time frame. So I do want to put that on your radar. And so it is kind of a thing that charter schools do, and DOE is infamous for, hurry up and wait. So we've been waiting for a while, but we anticipate that after the charter school conference next week, they'll notify us that we hopefully get the award, and we've got to do the budget really fast and give it to you and then get it back to DOE.
And I appreciate that
So-
information. And so procedurally then, does that come before the school board? Or will that go straight to the superintendent? Or maybe we need to do some research on that? Normally, we approve all grant applications.
Right, and I'll tell you that in other school districts, typically it does go before the school board.
There you go.
So,
there's another time constraint
right.
in terms of getting on the agenda and those kinds of things.
Right, so we're new working with you,
Right.
and so I wanted to make sure that I put that
Yeah,
out
thank
there
you.
because we were just notified of that this past week, so,
Okay, so we'll be looking for it.
right. The communication starts now.
Okay. Anything else, colleagues?
So I won't be here on Monday night because
All right.
coincidentally I'll be at the charter school conference in Orlando.
Okay.
But I'm available by email if anything else comes up. in the
Well, you
meantime.
might can be giving some of those sessions after all this.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward then. Item 10.2, we don't yet know if there'll be any items moved to consent, but there are none at this time. All right, Section 11, Construction Program Owners Representatives Business. That's Mr. Destin who's fulfilled that for us. And anything you'd like to share today?
As shared at the last meeting, we are working on kitchens in Pryor and Baker. We've reprioritized some of our money to go to a roof in Niceville.
Yep.
We're also working on, I don't know if you call it 1B or number 2 stage for the
Right.
school securities, but we will be talking about that hopefully in our closed session.
Yes, sir.
We have quite a bit more construction going on for school security, so quite busy.
All right, Mr. Destin, as always, thank you for doing all that.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to Section 12, Information Technology Seat Management Contract, no business there. Section 13, Mr. Attorney, your business, sir.
No business today.
Thank you. All right, Superintendent, you got some out-of-state field trips, and you may have some information, so I'll give it to you, sir.
Yes, sir. Just 2 quick things. One, last night we went to Walton High School. If you've never seen Walton High School, you need to. It's an amazing facility, brand new school over there in Walton. But we went there because the Department of Education, they're going on a listening tour as it pertains to the new standards So they're going across the state of Florida getting input on the standards. So they are hoping to have draft 3 of the new standards for ELA and math done by December, and then a recommendation to the governor by January. So we are eager to see what those revisions will look like. As you may recall, a lot of hard work and time and attention went into learning these new standards on the part of our teachers, staff, so eagerly awaiting to see what these new standards reveal. Also,
Will these be Florida core standards, or are they completely new and revised, or?
I'm 100% certain there will not be any mention of core.
There we go. That answers my question.
Secondly, so this afternoon, myself and Mr. Horton will be going to the Fort Walton Beach Chamber of Commerce, to their executive committee, and we will be talking about facilities in Okaloosa County. We'll be talking about some buildings in Okaloosa County, so we're going to give them, in essence, a brief of say the standards or what our buildings look like, our facilities look like, a little bit about our capital budget, and to share some information with them. Just wanted you all to be aware of that.
Right, very good. Well, thank you, Superintendent. And so now we move to board members' business. And Ms. Evanchik, I'll start with you, ma'am.
Okay, great, thank you. First of all, Monday night, several of us attended a concert by our middle and high school choir groups. These are the honor students, and I know we have great programs, but I was blown away. I thought it was fantastic. So I want to congratulate those students and those directors, choral directors, because they had to prepare students to perform by a director they're not used to, and music that was what I would think at a very high level of what they would have to do. And they did a fantastic job representing us on Monday night. Also this week we've had members of the FEA in our area going around, and they have a bus tour as well, talking about just funding in general in Florida schools, and it was great to meet them, and they seem to be glad to be in our area of the state. Oftentimes we don't get those people coming this far. And also next week will be Red Ribbon Week in all our schools, and of course that initiative goes back many, many years, where we emphasize with our students that they need to stay away from drugs. So a lot going on as we head in this 9 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Kelly.
Well, I could just tag on to that, and talking about the FEA tour was a very nice night, so thank you, Jordan, and your colleagues for putting that on. But in talking with one of their leaders, they suggested that they had made the route from Monroe County, Key West, all the way they were going to Pensacola, so in cars and a big bus. So I can't imagine making that trip, but certainly appreciate they're putting the focus on funding needs, considering facilities and buses and all of those things that we have, so thank you for that. We had another round of A+ celebrations, so we went to Edge yesterday, and those have been going very well. Just also like to say that you mentioned Walton High School. I had the privilege a couple of years ago of doing learning walks in every one of their buildings, and Superintendent Hughes was the principal there at that time, so he certainly had a wonderful facility, and he was able to open that there, so enjoyed that as well. That's all.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Bryant.
Well, as y'all know, it's National School Bus Safety Week, and I am proudly wearing a transportation shirt. And Mr. McInnes is actually out in the audience, and Mr. Chambers, if it's okay, if I could have Jay come up just to, one, be recognized, and maybe just give us a brief overview of transportation and just tell us what's going on. Of course, we're getting the new used buses, but we have a great team of people out there every day, and I think it's important to know that for as many miles as we put on the roads, we get those children home safely, and we pick them up safely too. So
we have about 200 buses on the road every day, and we have probably another 35 or 40 buses in our fleet that we use for spares. We travel about 3 million miles a year, and that includes field trip mileage. So we're out there going, going. But our drivers do a great job, and we're recognizing them this week, doing little things at the offices for them. So they don't get recognized as much as they should, and I take responsibility for that, and that's why we're doing some things this week for them. Some of the schools are also doing things like breakfast and things for them to recognize them, and we're giving them some safety tips and things of the week to kind of go along with the theme. The theme this year is My School Bus. It's the safest form of transportation. That's the state thing for Safety Week. So it was a poster that was done last summer in a contest by a child in our district, not in our district, but in the state. And each year that's how they come up with a theme for School Bus Safety Week. So just a few little tidbits about what we're doing out there, and trying to get everybody there safely and get them home safely. That's our motto.
And I appreciate you I called you this morning and told you that I was going to be wearing the shirt and all, and I appreciate you taking a few minutes to come up and speak. And you're right, gives us an opportunity to recognize those people behind that are driving those buses, and the mechanics, and all the administrative assistants that are out there helping with the phone calls. I'm sure that's gets the most phone calls is the bus barn. So, but thank you, Jay, to you and your team.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it.
And then finally, Dr. White, I would just like to congratulate Crestview High School's girls volleyball team and the Fort Walton Beach Vikings volleyball team. Unfortunately, last night their seasons came to an end. I know Fort Walton Beach was in Ponte Vedra Beach, and Crestview played at home last night. But if you ever get a chance to go watch girls volleyball, it is very impressive. And both of those programs are two of our elite programs. I know Choctaw a couple years ago actually brought home the state championship, so we do have a great volleyball program within our system. So congratulations to both of those teams, and I hate that they're not going any further, but they did represent Okaloosa County well. So,
But let me just say the Baker team's still going.
oh, that's right, and I appreciate you saying that. I
Baker
forgot.
volleyball's still
Yes.
going.
Yes.
That's right. Mr. Destin, anything?
I just echo Mr. Bryant's comments. When you take into account that our new used buses are going to be 15 years old, the fact that they can keep that fleet operating, and I've maintained vehicles that are that old, and it is not easy. That they can keep them running, and that they have the drivers and the folks that are supporting our old buses is pretty impressive.
Exactly. All right, folks. Well, that takes us through board members' comments, and it brings us to Section 16, public comment. And then we do have a public hearing, and you'll have to help me remember 6:15. But 17.1 is a public hearing for the adoption of revised school board policy 04-28, emergency operations, school safety and security, presented by Mr. Danny Dean, specialist, safe schools, and recommended by the superintendent for approval. And then that brings us to adjournment, unless there's any other business. Mr. Attorney, Mr. Chambers, colleagues, staff, we're all good. All right. We're adjourned.